I was standing in front of 3 investors, ready to pitch the company I'd spent 4 years building, when my stepbrother walked onto the stage and presented my invention as his own. For a few seconds, I honestly thought I was hallucinating. The slides behind him showed diagrams I'd personally designed. The product prototype on the table was nearly identical to the one sitting in my garage workshop. Even the market strategy sounded like it had been copied directly from my notes. And the worst part? Everyone in the room was applauding him. My name is Ethan. I'm 32 years old, and until that day, I thought my biggest challenge was turning a promising piece of technology into a successful business. I had no idea the real challenge would be surviving my own family. The technology itself wasn't glamorous. It wasn't some flying car or revolutionary AI system. It was a specialized energy management platform designed to reduce electricity waste in commercial buildings. Not exciting to most people, but extremely valuable to companies spending millions on energy costs every year. I started developing the concept after working as an electrical engineer for nearly a decade. Every building I visited had the same problem. Systems wasting enormous amounts of power because they couldn't accurately predict usage patterns. I became obsessed with solving it. For 4 years, I worked nights and weekends, birthdays, holidays, vacations, while my friends were getting married and buying houses. I was sitting in my garage surrounded by circuit boards and coffee cups. My girlfriend, Rachel, was one of the few people who believed in me. One day this thing is going to change your life, she'd tell me. I hope she was right. Then there was my stepbrother, Derek. Derek and I had known each other since we were teenagers. We were never close. Not because I didn't try. Derek simply had a habit of turning everything into a competition. If I got good grades, he needed better grades. If I bought a car, he needed a nicer one. If I got promoted, he'd spend weeks talking about how much money he made. Our parents constantly brushed it off. That's just Derek. But I learned long ago that Derek hated being second at anything. About 8 months before the investor conference, he suddenly became interested in my project. Very interested. At first, it seemed harmless. He'd ask questions during family dinners. What exactly does your system do? How does it make money? Have investors shown interest? I didn't think much of it. After all, he worked in sales, not engineering. Even if he wanted to copy the technology, he wouldn't know where to begin. At least, that's what I thought. Then he started showing up unexpectedly. He'd visit my garage workshop, ask to see demonstrations, offer business advice I never requested. Rachel noticed it before I did. Doesn't it seem weird how interested Derek suddenly is? I shrugged. Maybe he's finally trying to support me. She frowned. Or maybe he's trying to learn something. I laughed it off. That turned out to be a mistake. 3 months later, I landed my biggest opportunity yet. A venture capital group agreed to let me present at a startup showcase attended by investors from across the state. This was the moment I'd been working toward for years. If things went well, I'd finally secure funding. The night I received the invitation, my family celebrated. Everyone was excited. Everyone except Derek. He barely said a word. I remember catching him staring at me from across the dining room, not smiling, not congratulating me, just watching. The look in his eyes made me uncomfortable, but I ignored it. Again, 2 weeks before the showcase, something strange happened. A folder disappeared from my workshop. Nothing major, just a collection of development notes and prototype sketches. I searched everywhere. Couldn't find it. Eventually, I assumed I misplaced it. Then the investor conference arrived. I walked into the venue, expecting the biggest day of my life. Instead, I froze, because hanging near the entrance was a giant promotional banner, and printed across the top was a startup company I'd never heard of, founded by Derek. The product description underneath made my blood run cold, because it described my invention perfectly. And as I stared at that banner, trying to convince myself there had to be some explanation, I saw Derek walking toward the main stage, carrying a prototype that looked exactly like mine. And that's when I realized this wasn't a coincidence. For a moment, I couldn't move. The noise of the conference faded into the background as I stared at Derek carrying what looked like my life's work toward the stage. At first, I tried to convince myself there had to be another explanation. Maybe the technology only looked similar. Maybe he was consulting for another company. Then I got close enough to see the prototype. It wasn't similar. It was identical. The same design, the same interface, the same system architecture I'd spent years developing. My stomach dropped. "Derek!" I shouted. He turned around. For a split second, panic flashed across his face before being replaced by a confident smile. "Ethan, what is this?" Several people nearby looked over. Derek lowered his voice. "Not here." "Not here? You're about to present my technology." His smile didn't move. "Your technology?" I stared at him. "You stole my work." "No," he said calmly. "You built a product. I built a company." The arrogance in his voice made my blood boil. "You need to pull out of this conference." He laughed. "That's not happening." Then he walked away, just like that, as if he hadn't spent months stealing years of my life. I immediately called Rachel. After hearing everything, she went silent. Then she asked, "Do you remember when your workshop security camera mysteriously stopped recording?" I froze. 3 months earlier, one of my cameras had gone offline for nearly 2 weeks. I never figured out why. Suddenly, dozens of strange incidents started making sense. The missing folder, the unexpected visits, the endless questions. None of it felt random anymore. Rachel arrived at the conference shortly afterward. Together, we watched Derek's presentation on a large screen. Every slide made me angrier. The technical diagrams were mine. The market research was mine. Even parts of the pitch sounded like they had been copied from my notes. At one point, he used a joke I'd written into my original presentation. The audience laughed. Investors nodded. Business cards changed hands. Meanwhile, I sat there feeling sick. When the presentation ended, several investors rushed over to him. One requested a private meeting. Another asked about licensing opportunities. A third mentioned possible funding. Everything I'd spent years working toward was being handed to Derek. Rachel squeezed my arm. "We need proof." She was right. Without evidence, it would just be my word against his. That night, I started digging. The first breakthrough came from an old cloud storage account where I kept project backups. When I reviewed the access logs, something immediately stood out. An unfamiliar device had accessed my files dozens of times over several months. Technical documents, prototype designs, development notes, everything. Then I saw the device name. It matched Derek's laptop. For the first time since the conference, I felt a spark of hope. I downloaded every record and called a lawyer friend named Marcus. After listening to the situation, he asked one question. "Did you protect your intellectual property?" "Of course." "What exactly did you file?" I explained the paperwork I completed over the previous 2 years. There was a long pause. Then Marcus said something unexpected. "Don't confront him again." "What? Why?" "Because if these records are accurate, Derek may have a much bigger problem than he realizes." The next 2 days felt endless. Meanwhile, Derek was everywhere. Industry blogs praised the startup. LinkedIn posts celebrated his presentation. Even family members were bragging about his success online. Then things got worse. Rachel received a photo from someone who attended the conference. The image showed Derek signing what appeared to be a major investment agreement. The amount mentioned in the attached email chain was over $2 million. My heart sank. Investors were pouring serious money into a company built on my work. I started wondering if Derek was actually going to get away with it. Then my phone rang. It was Marcus. The moment I answered, I knew something had changed. "I reviewed your filings," he said. And there was a pause. Then he spoke carefully. "Ethan, your stepbrother has no idea what he's walked into." "What do you mean?" "Because 2 years ago, you didn't just develop the technology." I sat up straight. "What are you talking about?" Marcus took a breath. "You legally protected it in a way that could destroy his entire company." Before I could ask another question, another call came through. The caller ID showed Derek's name. And for the first time since the conference, he was calling me himself. I stared at Derek's name on my screen. For a moment, I considered ignoring the call. Then I answered. What do you want? There was a brief silence. When he finally spoke, his confidence was gone. Have you talked to a lawyer? That question told me everything. I leaned back in my chair. Why? Another pause. Come on, Ethan. We're family. I almost laughed. Funny, you didn't seem worried about family when you stole my technology. I didn't steal anything. Then why are you calling? His tone hardened instantly. Because you're making a mistake. No, Derek, I replied. You made a mistake. The line went dead. He hung up. For the first time since this nightmare started, I knew he was scared. An hour later, I was sitting across from Marcus in his office. A stack of documents covered the conference table between us. Patent filings, approval letters, technical diagrams, years of paperwork. Marcus slid one document toward me. Do you recognize this? My patent approval. Exactly. I frowned. I already know I have a patent. Marcus shook his head. No, you know you filed one. What you don't realize is how much protection it gives you. That got my attention. He pointed to several highlighted sections. You didn't just patent the software. He turned a page. You patented the underlying system architecture. Another page, the predictive process. Another, the integration framework. I stared at him. So what does that mean? It means Derek didn't build a competing product. Marcus smiled slightly. He built a company around technology he legally doesn't own. For the first time in weeks, I felt hopeful. Can we stop him? Marcus nodded. Oh, absolutely. Over the next few days, more evidence started appearing. The first surprise came through an anonymous email. Attached were internal company documents from Derek's startup, meeting notes, product plans, investor presentations. As I reviewed them, my heart started racing. Several documents referenced development files that had never been publicly released, files stored only in my private accounts. Someone inside Derek's company had access to my work. Then Rachel uncovered something else. A mutual friend shared screenshots from an old group chat. One message from Derek stood out. It had been sent months before he launched the company. The message read, "Give me 6 months and I'll turn Ethan's little project into something worth millions." At the time, he supposedly hadn't even started developing anything. Yet somehow he already knew exactly what he planned to build. Marcus loved that screenshot. But the biggest break came a few days later. One of Derek's investors requested a meeting. His name was Jonathan. The moment we sat down, he opened a folder. Inside were copies of Derek's fundraising materials. I immediately recognized sections taken directly from my business plan. Jonathan watched my reaction. You've seen these before. Yes. I thought so, he sighed. After receiving legal notices from your attorney, we hired an independent consultant. My pulse quickened, and the consultant concluded there's almost no chance two separate teams created systems this similar independently. I sat back in my chair. That wasn't just suspicion anymore. That was expert validation. Jonathan closed the folder. If your claims are accurate, Derek has a serious problem. I thought the situation couldn't get much worse for him. I was wrong. 3 nights later, Marcus called me. Ethan, sit down. My stomach tightened. What happened? We received additional documents. What kind? Marcus paused. The kind that change everything. I gripped the phone. Tell me. Derek didn't just pitch your technology to investors. So, he signed legal documents claiming he owned it. I froze. What? He personally guaranteed that all intellectual property belonged to his company. The room suddenly felt very quiet. Investors hadn't simply trusted his presentation. They had trusted signed legal certifications, official declarations, documents carrying his signature, and those declarations were false. Marcus continued. Several investors are discussing fraud claims. My heart pounded. This wasn't just a patent dispute anymore. Derek wasn't facing a failed startup. He was facing lawsuits from the very people funding him. But the biggest revelation arrived the next morning. Marcus emailed me a transcript from an internal company meeting. Someone inside Derek's startup had secretly recorded it. I opened the file and started reading. Halfway through, I stopped breathing, because Derek wasn't denying what he'd done. He was admitting it. One sentence jumped off the page. By the time Ethan figures out, we'll already be too big to stop. I read it again, then a third time. There it was. Proof, not suspicion, not theory, a direct admission. He knew exactly what he was doing from the beginning, but the final pages contained an even bigger surprise. Derek had scheduled a massive public product launch. Investors, media outlets, potential customers, industry leaders. Everyone would be there, and it was only 4 days away. A few minutes later, Marcus called. You need to attend that launch. Why? There was excitement in his voice. Because we're about to expose him in front of every person who helped build his company. And then, Marcus laughed. Then we're going to find out how long a startup survives when the entire room learns it was built on stolen technology. The 4 days leading up to Derek's product launch felt longer than the previous 4 years. Every morning I woke up wondering if he knew what was coming. Every night I checked my email, expecting some last-minute cancellation. But the launch continued exactly as planned. The venue was a luxury hotel ballroom packed with investors, reporters, business executives, and potential customers. By the time I arrived, the room was buzzing with excitement. Huge banners displaying Derek's company logo hung from the walls. Product demonstrations filled the center of the room. Staff members moved confidently between guests. From the outside, it looked like a startup on the verge of becoming a major success. Only a handful of people knew it was all about to collapse. Marcus arrived shortly after I did. With him were 2 patent attorneys and a representative from one of the investor groups. That alone told me things had become much bigger than a family dispute. Ready? Marcus asked, as I'll ever be. He handed me a folder. Inside were copies of my patent approvals, access logs, investor documents, and a transcript containing Derek's recorded admission. Months earlier, I would have given anything to have this evidence. Now it felt like carrying a loaded weapon. The presentation began 30 minutes later. Derek stepped onto the stage wearing an expensive suit and the same confident smile I'd seen at the investor conference. The audience applauded. I looked around the room. Most of them had no idea what was coming. Derek launched into his speech. He talked about innovation, hard work, entrepreneurship, building something from nothing. Each line made my jaw tighten. Then he unveiled the newest version of the product. The crowd erupted into applause. Several reporters started taking photos. Investors nodded approvingly. Derek was loving every second of it. Then Marcus stood up. Excuse me. The room immediately fell silent. Derek froze. I watched the color drain from his face. He recognized Marcus, and he knew exactly why he was there. Marcus calmly walked toward the stage. We represent the legal owner of the technology being demonstrated today. A wave of confusion swept through the audience. Several reporters lowered their cameras. Others immediately started recording. Derek tried to laugh. I'm sorry, but this isn't the time. It is precisely the time, Marcus interrupted. Then he handed copies of the patent documents to several investors sitting in the front row. I could literally see people reading the pages, whispering to each other, frowning. The atmosphere changed instantly. Derek's confidence vanished. One investor stood up. Is this true? Derek didn't answer. Another investor asked, do you actually own this technology? Still no answer. Marcus continued. We have evidence showing unauthorized access to proprietary files, internal company records referencing stolen development materials, and recordings confirming prior knowledge of ownership. The room exploded into conversation. Reporters started surrounding investors. People pulled out phones. Staff members looked completely lost. For the first time, Derek appeared genuinely terrified. Then came the final blow. Jonathan, the investor I'd met weeks earlier, stood up. The room quieted again. He looked directly at Derek. Did you sign investment documents certifying ownership of this intellectual property? Derek swallowed. Nobody spoke. Everyone waited. Finally, he answered, yes. The reaction was immediate. Several investors began gathering their belongings. One executive walked out without saying a word. Another investor turned to his attorney and started talking rapidly. The launch was falling apart in real time. Then something happened I never expected. Derek looked directly at me. Not Marcus, not the investors. Me. And for the first time since this started, I saw desperation instead of arrogance. Ethan, we can work this out. The room became silent. I almost laughed. Work this out? After months of lies? After stealing years of my life? After taking millions from investors? No, I said. His face fell. We're family. You should have remembered that before you stole from me. The reporters loved that. Cameras immediately swung in our direction. Questions started flying. Nobody cared about the product anymore. The story had become the scandal. Within an hour, the event was effectively over. Investors left. Media crews packed up. Potential customers disappeared. The company's biggest day had become its worst nightmare. As I walked toward the exit, Marcus caught up with me. It's done. I looked back at the nearly empty ballroom. Derek was standing alone near the stage. The same stage he'd proudly walked on less than 2 hours earlier. What happens now? I asked. Marcus smiled. Now the lawsuits begin. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought Derek had finally lost. But I was wrong, because the next morning I received a call from Marcus, and the first words out of his mouth made me stop breathing. Ethan, you need to see this. What happened? There was a long pause. Then he said, Derek didn't just steal your technology. My stomach tightened. What else is there? Marcus took a breath. We just discovered where he got the money to build the company. And when he told me whose money it was, everything suddenly became much worse. I sat in silence after Marcus told me where Derek's startup money had come from. At first, I thought I had misheard him. Say that again. Marcus sighed. The initial funding wasn't Derek's. My stomach tightened. Then whose was it? There was a pause. Your mother's. I froze. For several seconds, I couldn't say anything. My mother wasn't wealthy. She wasn't the kind of person who casually invested hundreds of thousands of dollars into startups. What are you talking about? Marcus explained that during the investigation, financial records revealed a series of transfers that had helped Derek launch the company months before the investor conference. The money came from accounts belonging to my mother and stepfather, retirement accounts, savings, emergency funds, money they'd spent decades building. And according to the records, they had invested almost everything. I couldn't believe it. Did they know? That's the problem, Marcus said. We're not sure. The answer arrived a few days later. My mother called me. For the first time since it started, she wasn't defending Derek. She was crying. Between tears, she told me the truth. Derek had convinced them he was building groundbreaking technology. He promised huge returns. He told them investors were already interested. He claimed it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. So they trusted him. They emptied accounts they had spent years building. They believed they were helping secure their future. Instead, they were financing a disaster. What happened to the money? I asked. Her voice broke. A lot of it's gone. The reality finally hit me. Derek hadn't just betrayed me. He had betrayed everyone who believed in him. Over the following months, everything unraveled. Investors formally withdrew support. Several filed lawsuits. Business partners walked away. Potential customers canceled agreements. The company quickly ran out of money. Without the rights to the technology, it had nothing left to sell. Then came the patent case. The evidence was overwhelming. The access logs, the copied documents, the investor certifications, the recorded meeting. Every attempt Derek made to defend himself fell apart. Eventually, his attorney stopped fighting and started negotiating. The outcome was exactly what Marcus predicted from the beginning. The company was shut down. Its remaining assets were liquidated. Every trace of the business Derek had built around my work disappeared. But surprisingly, that wasn't the moment that gave me closure. That happened several months later. I was having lunch with Rachel when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Derek. I hadn't spoken to him since the launch. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. Then I answered. His voice sounded completely different. Gone was the arrogance. Gone was the confidence. He sounded tired, older, defeated. I owe you an apology. I said nothing. For years, I had imagined hearing those words. Now that they finally came, they felt strangely empty. I thought I could beat you, he continued. I thought if I moved fast enough, none of it would matter. I stared out the restaurant window. It mattered. I know. Another long silence followed. Then he said something I never expected. I was jealous. I closed my eyes. For years, I'd suspected it. Now I was hearing it directly from him. You built something real, he said, and I hated that you did it without me. There wasn't much left to say after that. The call ended a few minutes later. It was the last conversation we ever had. Today, 3 years later, my company is thriving. The same investors who once backed Derek eventually partner with me. The technology continues to grow. We've expanded into multiple states and serve hundreds of commercial properties. Rachel is now my wife, and every time I walk into our headquarters, I remember the garage where this journey started. The funny thing is, if Derek had simply asked to join me in the beginning, I probably would have said yes. He could have been part of the success. Instead, he tried to take a shortcut, and shortcuts have a way of becoming dead ends. Looking back, I learned something important. Most people think success is about having the best idea. It isn't. Ideas are valuable, but integrity is priceless. You can recover from failure. You can recover from mistakes. But once people stop trusting you, rebuilding becomes nearly impossible. Derek stole my invention because he thought ownership came from possession. What he learned too late is that ownership comes from the work, the sacrifice, and the years nobody sees. In the end, he lost the company he tried to steal. I gained the future I worked to build. And that's why I'll never forget the lesson this experience taught me. The fastest way to lose everything is to try taking what you never earned.